Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am doing my TBR for October, which in the US is National Employment Disability Awareness Month. And if you're not familiar with what that is, I've linked a Wikipedia article to it down below. But basically it's a month just focusing on disability. Since every month I focus on a different topic, I'll link my playlist to my various TBRs down below. I thought that October would be such a great month to take a look at this because I don't think I do have very good awareness of the issues that people with disabilities face. One of the booktubers that I really like watching, Ian at Nur Chaos, who I will link below, does a really good job when reviewing books about thinking critically about issues of ableism. And I think that he was the first person that I really heard talking about ableism. I mean, I'm just not very obviously tuned into that conversation, but he does such a great job of looking at the way that various things are approached and if it's an ableist viewpoint that's taken and if issues that affect people who are disabled aren't really understood or addressed. And that made me think, I am not familiar with this, and I'm probably have a bit of an ableist viewpoint simply because I'm not aware and because I haven't experienced a lot of those issues myself. So I want to branch out a little and become more aware and learn more about it, read from people who have experienced it, read about stories centering characters with various disabilities, and just broaden my perspective. So for anybody like me who just really isn't as familiar with disability, I have linked as well down below the CDC, or Center for Disease Control's kind of explanation of what is a disability. Because when I decided to do this, I realized I don't even know what counts as a disability. And it turns out that it's actually very, very broad. So a disability can be anything. So any sort of physical or mental impairment or anything that prevents you from participating in something or just limits the actions that you can take or the activities you can be involved in. And this can be anything really. It can be something like autism, it can be something like dementia, it can be something like depression or an eating disorder, or it could be blindness or deafness or the loss of a limb or any sort of thing that just prevents you from living life in sort of a typical way. And what they all really have in common is that the world isn't designed for people who have disabilities, and it makes it difficult to live a normal life. And I think that one of the themes that I'm sure I'm going to see is just how that affects people and how they feel, maybe issues of access, maybe issues of people not considering them. And so I'm really, really interested in reading a lot of these stories. So let me get into the 10 books that I would like to prioritize for this month. And as always, it's not that I'm going to read all 10 of these books, and it's not that I won't be reading other books as well. It's just that these are ones that I want to kind of keep at the top of my mind for trying to borrow them from the library. So the first thing that I want to read is Uncanny Magazine, issue 24, Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction. So this isn't a book, it's actually a magazine issue, and it's got a bunch of short stories all about being disabled in science fiction, as well as I think some nonfiction essays on the topic. I heard Rachel at Kalanadi, who I will link below, mention this, as well as it looks like Paul from Weymouth has a review of this issue. So I will link that review down below. And they seem to really like this, so I wanted to pick it up. Recently, I think also Uncanny Magazine came out with an issue very similar for Disabled People Destroy Fantasy, which I don't think that they liked as much, but the science fiction one I think they seem to like, so I really want to read it. And I just love short stories. I'm trying to read more short stories anyway, so that really works for me. Plus, I noticed that one of the authors is A.T. Greenblatt, who I saw speak at Worldcon, and I really liked what she had to say on the panel that she was on. So I want to see what her writing is like as well. Next, I'd like to read Darius the Great is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This is a YA contemporary about an Iranian-American boy who goes to visit family back in Iran. It's first time visiting, and he just feels so out of place. And he's dealing with a lot of depression. So he's got clinical depression. And I became really interested in this when I saw Ian from Nur Chaos, who I mentioned below, do a review of it, which I will link. And it just seems like this is such a powerful and sweet story about a boy dealing with depression and dealing with finding connection. So I've been wanting to get to it since I saw Ian talk about it. Next, I'd like to read Still Alice by Lisa Genova. I saw the movie adaptation of this, which was really good, by the way, a few years ago, and I really, really liked it. Recently, I saw Madelyn at MadeWithBooks do a video all devoted to talking about dementia and literature, looking at Still Alice. I highly recommend that if you have any interest in this topic, you check out the video, which I will link below. She does such a great job of really analyzing the themes, understanding how dementia, how Alzheimer's is presented in this story, and kind of how that talks about the way that we have a kind of form our own identities and have relationships with others. That video was so good. I definitely want to pick up this book. So even though I've seen the movie, I think that the book is just going to be such a great experience after having listened to her analysis of it. And if you're not familiar, Still Alice is a story about a professor who is totally top of her field. I think she's a linguist, and she comes down with early onset Alzheimer's, and sort of she loses her memories, she loses her cognitive functioning, and it's the story of how her life changes as that happens. So I think that this will break my heart because I know the movie did, but I'm really looking forward to reading it. Next on my list is The Outside by Ada Hoffman. This is a science fiction book about a scientist who is autistic, and I believe that this is Own Voices for Autism, who discovers like a new sort of like warp drive energy thing that ends up going very badly and causing a lot of problems. And because it goes badly, there's some sort of AI gods which intervene and then make her go on this quest to find her old mentor who they want for some reason. And it just sounds like it's kind of this thriller, mystery, adventure type of story, filled with math and science and all sorts of cool things. So I expect this to be like a really fun adventure type of sci-fi, while also hopefully having some really interesting perspectives from an autistic scientist's point of view. Next on my list is A Time to Dance by Padma Venkatraman. This is a YA contemporary about an Indian girl who is a bharatanatyam dancer. Bharatanatyam is a classical form of religious Indian dance that requires a lot of strength and precision. It's a very powerful dance style. And the main girl loses one of her legs in an accident. And that really throws her whole life for a loop because she kind of defines herself as this Bharatanatyam dancer. And so losing her leg, it means she has to redefine who she is and how she interacts with others. So this sounds like it's going to be a really fascinating story, but also I just am a huge fan of Bharatanatyam. I saw somebody when I was in college perform, and I thought it was the coolest dance I'd ever seen. Way cooler than like ballet or something. If you're not familiar with it, I found a video of somebody dancing, so I've linked that below. You should truly check it out because it is the coolest form of dance I've ever seen. And it is, it really is something that is just so powerful and so intense. The people who go through it have to train from childhood. I mean, they have to train for years and years and years. So just the story about somebody who's built their life around that and what it means to sort of lose that ability. I think that's going to be a really powerful story. Also, this is a YA novel told in verse. And if anybody's been watching my channel for a little while, you'll remember that I have read a lot of YA novels in verse this year that I have loved. So I've read The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, and Finding Baba Yaga by Jane Yolen, all of which I think I gave 5 stars to. I really like them all. So here's hoping that I get a 4th one that I give 5 stars to. Next on my list is The Care and Feeding of Ravenously Hungry Girls by Anissa Gray. So this is a contemporary family drama about 3 adult sisters who have, some issues in their relationships, but it turns out that the eldest sister, who has 2 teenage girls, she and her husband have been involved in some bad activities and they get arrested and taken away. The other 2 sisters have to step in and take care of the teenage daughters, and there's just a lot going on. The thing about this book is that the author has dealt with some eating disorders, and one of the characters in this deals with some eating disorders, and I've read that it's a very good representation of eating disorders, so I really am interested in reading this. I don't know a ton about eating disorders, but in high school there was a really good discussion in one of my classes. We had read Franz Kafka's short story, Hunger Artist, which it's just a classic story about kind of a circus performer who starves himself, and people come and watch that. And I remember in high school totally not getting it. I didn't understand at all why he would starve himself, what was so important about this. And there was this whole discussion that came out about how for many people, their bodies are one of the few things they feel like they have control over, and so often eating disorders can come about as a way to control a life where you feel very out of control. That's not necessarily what Kafka was getting to, but that discussion really made me realize, I can see how that would be a coping mechanism. And since that point, I have definitely known people who have dealt with eating disorders, and for them too, it was very much in a world, in a life where they feel totally powerless, the one thing that they can control is their bodies. So in this story, it sounds like a lot of the characters are dealing with various types of trauma and difficulties, and so those eating disorders kind of play into that. So I'm really interested in hearing about how these characters develop, how that plays a role, especially because it is own voices. The next book on my list is also own voices, but quite a bit lighter. It is a children's graphic novel called El Deafo by Cece Bell. So this is sort of an autobiographical type of story, but slightly fictionalized, about Cece's childhood, where she was sick and she lost her hearing, and she had to get a very bulky, big hearing aid, and she went back to school. All the other kids were hearing, and she felt like she really stuck out, but she discovered that her hearing aid was really special, and it allowed her to hear the teachers even when they weren't in the room, and so she got a lot of insight into teacher secrets. And so this book really seems like it's going to deal a lot with the idea of isolation, but also kind of bridging that gap, that differences between you and other people. It just sounds like it's a very sweet story. The author, Cece Bell, has a little bit of a short video talking about her childhood experiences and how those influenced her. So I will link that below for anybody who's interested. The next book I'd like to read is also a memoir, although quite a bit heavier. So I'd like to read The Diving Bell and the Butterfly by Jean-Dominique Bauby, which is a true memoir of Bauby's life, and he was a magazine editor who had a very severe stroke that left him completely paralyzed. So he had what's called locked-in syndrome, where he couldn't speak, he couldn't move, he couldn't do anything other than blink one eye. And through blinking one eye, he was able to, letter by letter, basically, communicate the story that he wanted to write. And so he wrote this memoir, and I think that it's a really interesting, powerful idea to read somebody's memoir who has been able, up until this very recent point in their life, and then suddenly lost all of that ability, and what that is like, what that experience of loss of ability is like. Next on my list is another nonfiction, The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Weijun Wang. So Wang is an author who has a lot of chronic and mental illnesses, and these are her essays about that experience, about what it's like to have different chronic and mental illnesses, what kind of goes on, how she's treated, how she wants to be treated, just a lot of discussions about what it's like to deal with these kinds of differences. I've heard a number of different people have really, really liked this collection, so I would love to read it, although the wait list at my library is quite long, so we'll see if I get it in time. And lastly on my list is another nonfiction, Dopesick by Beth Macy. This is a book that looks at the history and the state of the opioid epidemic in the US. So in the US in the past 20 years, there are a lot of people who have become addicted to opioids. Often I believe this is because they are prescribed some sort of opioid-based painkillers by their doctors when they have something like a sports injury. But because it's highly addictive, they get addicted to it and they're unable to stop taking the medication even when the pain stops. And if they lose their prescription, they often turn to illegal drugs. So this is something that has really exploded in the US, and I believe that there have been a number of lawsuits against the pharmaceutical companies that pushed these pills so heavily because of the intense effects that it has had. It has been something that has gotten really bad in the US to the degree that people from all walks of life, all sorts of backgrounds, have really had their lives destroyed by this addiction. So this is definitely something that I think falls within that idea of impairing your ability to live daily life. So I'm interested in looking at this book as well. So those are the books that I'm going to be prioritizing for October. If anybody else knows of any books that really do a good job of focusing on disability, please definitely give me recommendations in the comments below. Or if you've read any of these books and you have ideas of which ones I should start with, let me know. I think this is going to be a really interesting and very new topic for me to read about this month.